Okay, everybody. So I think we're going to start. My name's David Blower, and so we're here to talk about feminism and masculinity. I think I will sit down. I think the best way to begin to introduce myself and the discussion is to tell you about a weird dream I had a couple of weeks ago. I've started reading Carl Jung, so I'm having to pay attention to my dreams in case they're saying something about my unconscious mind. So I dreamt a couple of weeks ago that I was at a feminist conference, and of course this had already been arranged. And it was a lovely spring day. We were met around tables outside. It was very nice. And I was sat next to Lucy Holmes, who runs the No More Page 3 campaign, if you've heard of that. And you know, we were talking about things, and it was all right. But the first thing I was aware of was that I was just wearing my boxer shorts. It was one of those dreams, and I was sort of trying to well, if I just look like I just dress this way, then no one will, they'll just think, oh, he just dresses that way. So I was just trying to roll with it. My Banana Man boxer shorts, and then we got up and started walking to the next discussion or whatever, and I realised that Lucy Holmes was like 9 foot tall. So I don't know if anyone would care to interpret that dream for me, but
you shouldn't use your family.
So I guess I've been wheeled before you today as someone who has been involved in feminist activism and so on and so forth, and yet my subconscious tells me that I'm quite nervous. I think I recognise that. I don't think that's an entirely crazy dream. Yeah, possibly. I thought I was okay with it, but yeah. Which I'm sure is partly to do with being a man at a feminist conference. Even if a lot of me thinks, isn't worrying about it or thinking about it, I'm sure part of me feels nervous or afraid of the situation. So we're going to explore a bit about what it is, what it's like for men getting involved in feminism, questions of what masculinity is and if it is something at all, and how that intersects with feminism, and what are the challenges for men, who aren't involved in feminism, in order to move towards that. I'll tell you a bit about what I've done in the last few years, which will give you a bit of a background as to where I'm coming from, what my kind of activism has been about. I started a band some years ago called the Army of the Broken Hearted, and we didn't really want to be just a band playing gigs in venues and looking for a record deal. We sort of wanted to be, we wanted to play in public spaces, and we wanted to kind of take back public space in a way, and to comment on the powers, the representation, the culture that goes through public space, and ask who owns, who holds those powers in public space, who holds powers over what gets said and projected in public space. So we started this band, we started playing in public spaces, and here is, so here's a photo of us playing one of our gigs, and we saw lots of shops in the city centre where the kind of the frontage had the same formula, and it's a man in a suit and a woman in her underwear, which isn't too shocking an image or anything. It's not a case of being offended in that way. It's a case of the representation of the man and the woman. So we played, different places around the city where you saw this same juxtaposition going on. The other interesting thing about these actions, we don't have 15, 20 people in our band. but we invite people to come and join. And I guess about half the people here are men who are wanted to sort of talk about issues of gender and power and who projects male and female sexuality in certain ways. I'll show you what happened the next day. So they took they took the picture of the lady down because obviously they thought we were terrified of pants, and then but they left the man there. So it was interesting. Actually, it actually did stuff. We weren't really protesting to the shop. We were trying to speak to the public and ask the public to begin to ask questions about the imagery of public space and who runs it to what ends. But then, even once you take the images out, the mannequins are sort of brilliantly descriptive of our gender politics anyway, aren't they?
Well, it's interesting to see this picture. You've got this woman lifting a lady in one end and then another woman with a headscarf at the other end of the face.
Yeah. That is the fascinating juxtaposition of Western life now, isn't it? The burqa and the catalogue picture. We did protest about various different things, or we not really protests, actions about various different things. And we got on to doing things about the Murdoch press, particularly when the News of the World went down. I think we thought maybe this would be a good time to see if you could address the sort of power that the Sun has. And then the No More Page 3 campaign started happening. So we got involved in that. Sorry about the scrappiness of the picture. It's from a local newspaper. But we began doing actions as part of the No More Page 3 campaign. And again, we blew the whistle. And I think this is mostly men coming to get involved in this campaign. I don't really know why that is. But I suppose we're here to sort of explore possibilities and ask ourselves those kinds of questions.
That's enough of those for now. Was your band mostly men?
No, it's about even mix. Yeah. Mostly Christians, although some people aren't Christians, very involved as well. But yeah, an even mix. And we weren't like, let's start a feminist band. We just wanted to start a band that was sort of prophetically engaging with the powers of public space and of public life and of Western life, the world that we live and breathe.
Did you know something about that women didn't feel able to put themselves out in that way, like by making a public, by standing out there and with parties take place, where there's something that they would be more likely to be objectified, or that the abuse that they may experience by sort of standing up to the powers would be much more sort of offensive than when men do it.
So let me check I've got the question right. If it's predominantly women doing an action of that kind, would there be a different reaction to it? Would they be seen as?
Is that why there was more men who engaged in the actions? Because if women did that, they would start getting all right now. That would
right.
be the sort of experience that they would have as women of making that sort of protest, wouldn't they? Yeah, women do it, but I just wondered whether that was partly why you got more men than women.
It's mainly it's a male. The stereotype is a male would be the consumer of that thing. So it's more powerful to have
I think it is.
Yeah. We had men and women with the tape, with their eyes taped closed, and I think some women did express like the slight nervousness about it, because all of us would get abuse and horrible things shouted at us, but the dynamics are different if you're a man or a woman. So there's an issue, but I think that's probably one of the good outcomes of the fact that we had a good balance, was that there was a feeling of solidarity, and you felt, you could make that kind of protest and feel strong and whatnot. But I don't know if that's why more men got involved out of a oh, well, we'd better just to make sure the girls are all right, or something like that.
I know why more women didn't get involved, I suppose.
Ah, right. It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I never pictured it in that way, that it was an absence of women. I just saw it as an unexpected presence of men. But maybe that's a factor.
I also wonder if there's an extent to which many men would not see many opportunities to protest in public with other men. If they'd seen other protests about No More Page 3, then it's much more likely those have been protests by women and they've not felt it's so easy to join.
Right.
So in fact, there were men there to start with.
Yeah.
It's easier for more men to join.
I mean, perhaps it's a factor for men that a man has, because I would be like the whistleblower who said, okay, let's meet here at this time. Maybe that's a factor that makes men feel, either, good, I don't mind being part of something that's got men in it, or if a man's in charge, or perhaps, good, I don't, I feel like I wouldn't be gate crashing their thing or something like that. Perhaps it would make them feel comfortable in that way. Yeah. Briefly, I mean, we don't all have to say something, but I'd just like to get a feeling for what kind of, why did people come to this workshop, or what sort of things were you hoping to explore? Or even what are the kind of circumstances that bring you to this question?
I came because I read your book and loved it. And that's why I wanted to come here and listen to you talking.
£5 on the table. Oh, look, there's a No More Page 3 campaign as well. Yeah.
What's your book called?
It's called Kingdom versus Empire. Perhaps I'll mention a little bit about what it's about in the course of things.
You said you'd interviewed some Christian men.
Yeah.
And I was interested in hearing what they said.
Yeah. Not nearly as many as you interviewed, but yeah, but it's not. Yeah. Okay.
I came because I'm interested to see. I work with young people. I want to know how we address the issues of our boys as well. You see the aggression in our boys, even when they're just mixing and playing. How do we challenge them? How do we get them to think about how we treat the girls around them? Because it's almost cultural for them too, I think. These are just ordinary kids. Already you can see the stereotypes and the way they behave.
Right.
So how do we challenge them?
Yeah. And do you see like aggression towards the girls?
I mean, they're already objectifying them. They don't realise they're doing it. It's part of the culture. And the girls object at first, but then they become part of it because they want to be like the other girls. And it's all very simple, very middle class, very ordinary kids, but it's there, you can see it.
Yeah.
You must control the super thing. They're boys and they're someone interviewing, so how do I get them to acknowledge their girls there and train my husband?
Yeah.
It's just interesting to think about men's role in feminist activism generally, because a lot of the feminist groups I've been in don't allow men to go into them. So I think some of the groups they have certain events that were like a public lecture or the actual protest themselves, then they welcome men to go. But the actual organising meetings or the sort of core meetings of the groups are self-defining women only.
So that's actually a rule rather than just a sort of cultural inclination.
Yeah, but it's in both groups that I was in, it sort of was all something that's being discussed with some people, like myself included, were quite uncomfortable with that, and I felt like it was a bit of a dated way of thinking about things. But I don't know. It's just, but do you need safe spaces that are women? And it's interesting your example you just gave, because that's the first feminist protest I've ever seen where there are more men than women. Maybe that's just me.
I think that's very interesting because it takes me back, say, I was here 30 years ago, and university 30 years ago, it wasn't easy possible to recognise the idea of a man being a feminist. And so it was very hard to know how to be supportive, because you can understand the need for safe space, for example, but to exclude any man from being supportive seemed to be unhelpful and reinforcing some of those stereotypes that you were talking about. So I think that's interesting. And I also, Christian, was caught by your comment about church leaders. It's one of the things that I get quite loud about, anti-patriarchy and headship within the church.
Yeah. Those issues are very alive in the church in a way that aren't. Well, for people outside the church, they're issues that people are on the outside of, aren't they? But for us in the church, it's this unique kind of feminist struggle that's unique to the church.
Yes, I mean, particularly I've seen it in terms of the new and non-denominational evangelical churches and the influence from the States in terms of this ghastly thing called complementarianism, which is kind of trying to market male headship in a more acceptable way.
I think I got one of those in here. But we'll come to that. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Do you guys want to add anything?
I can, because I've been in so many situations where you're in a public space trying to do something, and then suddenly there's this kind of eruption of fury. Well, it isn't really fury. It's sort of like catches you unaware, and I think that it's to do with when I'm doing something very creative, but also quite open in a space that seems to have been designated as male, but I was so naive I didn't realise that. And so you get this. So you get
phallic symbol in the middle.
No, and then you get this kind of very violent explosion, which I've been the kind of recipient of, when you get kind of cut to pieces in public. And then everyone goes away, and then afterwards, lots of women come up to you and say, "Oh, I really liked what you were doing," but they didn't dare say it in public. And then everyone goes home and washes their hands of it. And I just thought, my goodness, here's a man who's ready to say he is frightened, and he's even given us a Jungian example around the great passionate devotee of Jung. And I do think that this is just exactly the place where it's all at. It's at this level of dreams, and the fact that Lucy Finnegan is 9 foot tall, and you were in the kind of chap in your boxer shorts. That was brilliant. Oh, that's a good start. You're actually saying that. You're opening up a possible space at last for some kind of common discussion. I think it's the most important thing there is. That's right.
I came because my husband was studying for 2 years at Doctoral College in Curate now, and because he was a feminist, he looked after our daughter while I was doing the approaches to faith course. And it was run by Nicholas Lee, and she invited men to come and be part of that. And so we had 2 guys from the gay and 2 guys from the straight. And I think, well, Nicola was brilliant. I think I got more out of listening to a men's perspective, especially thinking about how we bring up our son as well. Like he was a good boy, and really wanted to hear more of them talking about feminism.
Grand.
I think, as particularly over the last couple of weeks, I've had some very interesting discussions with some of my male friends about feminism and about that sort of thing, and it just seemed to fit nicely.
Well, I think because the workshop is asking 3 very clear questions. Or 3 questions that I've been puzzling over for 30 years. And I want to write the answers down.
I feel right back in my boxer shorts again.
That's not bad. That's just, it's very interesting. This is a workshop workshop was asking 3 specific questions. None of the others are, that I would like to go to them all. They're all very interesting. This is the only one that's phrased in, why are men and women really feminists? What's the state of masculinity today? And what kind of masculinity helps me? So it's specific and to the point.
Yeah.
And I want to write it all down.
Okay, very good. No, you shall have your answers, no doubt. In which case, we better ask the first question, which is why men are rarely feminists. I'll put that out there. We better not spend too much time on it, or we'll run out of time, won't we? But what sort of things initially jump into your minds about why men are rarely feminists?
I was talking about this debate, we had that break just at the end and talked about what struck you and thinking, well, actually my dad is probably a feminist, but he would never say I'm a feminist. But he, was one of the baby boomers, had post-war, and then he was a teacher, and he deliberately didn't go for deputy head job because he wanted to spend more time with the family. And then when me and my siblings were older, he really encouraged my mum to go back to work, and he would cook tea on a Tuesday because my mum was at work on a Tuesday, which I think in his generation was probably quite groundbreaking. But he wouldn't say he was a feminist, he was just decent.
So maybe a lot of men are feminists, but either they don't realise or they don't feel comfortable sort of with calling themselves it or something.
Some feminists don't allow men to be feminists. So most of the radical feminists I know get really angry if men call themselves feminists and say, no, you're a pro-feminist man. And you're not allowed to call yourself a feminist if you're a man. And so I think part of it is that there is an end of the feminist spectrum which says men can't be feminists and that's it. So that's why it's problematic in men becoming feminists.
Yeah. I know a man who calls himself a radical feminist, so that's awfully confusing, isn't it?
To be fair, they won't let me on either because I'm a Christian, so I'm not really
okay.
Going back to what you said, that definition of fit my father and mother in that they respected people. So they wouldn't call themselves feminists. But certainly I was given an education at a time when maybe only boys were. I did it with fun to educate me and to make sure I went to work and took advantage of it. My husband did it too. When I was at work, my children, it was an equal, but they probably didn't identify with feminism. They just feel that everyone deserves respect. Perhaps not quite as aware as maybe we are of the differences in the inadequacies out there. But they're not so far away from us that we couldn't.
No. And I think now, I don't know, did someone say this in the earlier meeting, or maybe it was in our small group, that probably everybody now would say that they believe in equality. So the gap between that and feminism is partly a question, isn't it?
It's interesting what Christian said this morning about, for some reason, even now, there's still this idea of feminism as being sort of alternative thing, so it's sort of not so socially acceptable to call yourself a feminist.
I think some of it is the fact, for me, feminism is an intentional act against systemic structures. So there's a sort of, in my own home life, how I interact with my children, but it's also objecting to certain things that lots of people might not, sort of being very principled in objecting to certain things that makes me a feminist rather than somebody who cares for everybody type thing. And I think it's not very comfortable when you have to start saying, well, no, my daughter's not doing that, no, my son's not allowed to do that. This is how we live our lives. I will speak out if somebody uses sexism in front of me, whereas other people might privately hold that. It's a bit like Christianity, isn't it? You can privately think, oh, women and men should be equal, but not publicly live out that or sacrifice what is required. I think that's when you move into being a feminist from being a pro-equality.
Just tell my husband he's a feminist.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
He will speak out.
Yeah.
He wants to speak out with men who make comments like women. It's not acceptable.
But I'm not quite sure. You said everybody believes in equality, which I think I'd like to believe. But if it were true, nobody would buy the Daily Mail.
Yeah. But perhaps the quote was something like, everybody thinks they believe in equality, or something like that. Or everyone likes to think they believe in equality.
Yeah, I think UKIP are quite happy to say we don't believe in equality.
Well, they probably think those people should have their equality somewhere else or something, don't they?
Yeah, equality to me is what they believe in, perhaps.
Yeah, but I'm sure if you ask them, they would be adamant that no, we believe in equality. However wrong
Yes.
it might be in this case or that case, I think very few people will be saying that they don't believe in equality.
It's cognitive dissonance, isn't it? That term that describes when you think you believe something but actually believe something else. And it's that, you say, oh, I believe this, but if you believed it, you would act it out. And what you do is you like the idea of it more than actually fundamentally believing it. Yeah, it's not a practice, is it?
Yeah. I think it's also I don't really believe it, but I think I have to say I believe it in order to be acceptable in society.
I better start telling you what people told me.
Yes.
So I've sort of I tried to categorise the statements helpfully into what I saw as 4 different kinds in ascending levels of importance. I think that the first level that seemed to me the most shallow level. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that the most insignificant kind were the philosophical differences. I don't believe I'm not a feminist because I believe something different. I'll tell you why I thought those were of the shallower kind in a moment. But what sort of things do people say? I'm cautious about positive discrimination. So feminism seems to be about using positive discrimination to restore inequalities in society. So there's
positive discrimination for 2,000 years. That's all right, isn't it?
No, yeah, well, that was for a different purpose, though, wasn't it? And somebody else mentions positive discrimination as well. What do we have? I'm uneasy with positive discrimination. There we go. I've read it. The pursuit of legal equality, which this person was all for, by the way. You'll probably find me defending these people in certain ways, because often they're asking themselves introspectively, why am I not a feminist? They're not quite sure. They're feeling it out. They're brainstorming. They're also people I know personally. So I know their character. They're not, two-dimensional people for me to push over. But you people, I'm sure, can.
Also, if you know them, then maybe they're more comfortable with thinking out loud in front of you, maybe they might.
Yeah.
Differently if they were feminist.
I mean, the typical thing is, if you ask a man why he's not a feminist, is that they won't know, because they've never asked themselves a question before. And so they have to sit there. And I think we have to be gracious to allow them to feel out, why am I not a feminist? I don't know, is it because of this, because of that? Anyway, the pursuit of legal equality is in danger of losing a consciousness of complementary difference between genders. So the idea that in pursuit of equality we end up becoming the same and losing the ability to celebrate difference. This person, I'll just read it. This person is suspicious of the covetous or self-interested motivation of feminism. He likened it to a 3-year-old that wants a toy just because the other kid has it. But this is a stereotype. The second question I ask people is, do you know any feminists? And the answer was generally no. Although, interestingly, they know me. No, I'm not. I'm sort of, yeah. I think when you say, do you know a feminist, they think, do you know a woman who is a feminist?
Wants to take all their things away from them.
Wants to take your toys. Wants to take the snooker table. So, I mean, you begin to see that a lot of this is felt. It's not thought, it's felt. It's not felt that I'm a feminist. pointing a gun at them when they answer the questions. The reason the philosophical differences. They're also, I don't really know what it means to be a feminist. Or my understanding of what it means to be a feminist is, I don't know. What is a feminist? What was I saying?
When you ask the question, if you give them a definition of feminism and say, can you sign up to that or not?
No, I didn't. I suppose I wanted to know where they were at, rather than give them an ultimatum as such. I wanted to explore where they were at and where they had been at. So, and it was interesting that one of the things came up a lot is one. This is the second level, not knowing any feminists or not knowing what it really means to be a feminist. And this isn't a ridiculable issue. This is an interesting issue that people don't actually. If you know of something but you don't know anybody who represents that, then all you have is a stereotype, really, isn't it? Of some kind, and where you get your stereotypes from becomes definitive. So the second level of reasons is social. Just don't know any feminists.
I don't mind me interrupting, but sometimes they're rather cringy. But I saw something on Upworthy yesterday, and it was an interview on Al Jazeera of a Ohio, somebody part of the legislature in Ohio, who has campaigned against abortion, and suddenly got caught out when the lady interviewing him said, "Why do women choose to have abortions? Why do women want abortions?" And in exactly the same way as saying, "Men, what is feminism? Do you believe in it?" He was totally floundering. He said, "I've never thought about that." So, I mean, and to point out, how could you have campaigned for years against abortion without ever having thought why somebody might want an abortion? And I think there's similar elements in some of what you're saying. I've never thought about feminism.
Yeah, this is the thing where I guess you see where people are eating different ends of the piece of spaghetti here, aren't there? This person is obviously campaigning against that because he has moral reasons or philosophically moral reasons about it, whereas he's not really in touch with the human situation of it. But I think it works both ways, because you will have a lot of Christians who want to be feminists, but they're not necessarily very pro-choice. And then there's a question: can I be a feminist of any kind if I'm not pro-choice? Is that discussion available, or is there room for that discussion? This is another example of where the complete non-experience of each other's starting point or world is a barrier. It's that sociological barrier. You're just not mixing.
The world is so unacceptable to the other that you can't even discuss it.
Yes, yeah. I think we'll find time and time again that dialogue is necessary. That creating a gracious space to talk and be a dork and say the wrong thing and be an idiot and be in your boxer shorts is a necessary process. The reason I thought that the philosophical reasons were the most superficial was because the people who had mostly philosophical reasons were very tense, as though their testicles were in a guillotine and it was going to go any moment, if you said the wrong clanger. Whereas people who got into other lines of self-inquiry, why am I not a feminist, were not in that place of tension. And I think probably when you're not in the place of tension, or when you've got through the place of tension, you're finding the deeper reasons in yourself for things. So I might be wrong about it. That was my Jungian diagnosis. The third, and this seemed to be the most real to me, was a matter of fear, of irrational fear that was explained as such. People explained it as irrational fear. So Are you a feminist? I might be, but I wouldn't appropriate the term. It's a super loaded term, and I'm quite scared of it. It comes with a lot of history. There is a fire-breathing, man-hating image of feminists in media and culture, and that's left its mark. This person would never say, "Oh, and I bought into that because I think it's right." This person was just aware that even though you would consciously think that's ridiculous, that it still had found its way into his gut somehow. I'd be quite intimidated by a room full of feminists. One person mused to himself. Another person, I've got a negative image about the term. A person who's overemphasizing the rights of females over everybody else. It has the connotation of aggressive compensation. Although I get that to rebalance an unjust situation, you need to overemphasize. And he went on to reflect, there is in myself a tension between the recognition of the necessity for feminism and a personal feeling of recoiling from the aggression. So people are really, they're being vulnerable here. They're trying to articulate to themselves, where does the fear come from? What am I worried about?
Is it that they're scared of? Is it that whole thing that they're actually scared of the aggression, or are they scared of what they're going to lose? So, as a man, there's a loss of power or privilege if feminism becomes a reality, and actually, are they more scared that I won't be in charge? Is that not maybe consciously, but do you think maybe subconsciously that's part of what's going on? Is, well, if women get more power, men are going to lose it, and that's not very pleasant.
I can only tell you what I think, because that question's giant, isn't it? And really, I think it'd be hard to find a certain answer to it. I don't think so. For most of the people I asked, maybe not all, but mostly, I think the fear, to me, seems partly the fear of a situation that you don't understand, or the fear of pain and suffering that you don't understand. So, if you see yourself in the role of the oppressor, however much you don't associate yourself with those kinds of values, then there's a fear that you don't understand what it feels like to be the oppressed, and that if you try and enter that situation, it's like how do you, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to enter this room. I don't know what's expected of me or what the precedent is.
I can agree with you more, and I think that's why £45 million is spent abroad by Cathol on overseas projects, because that's something tangible that you can, you identify this slum or that malaria problem, and it's like you can manage that.
Yeah.
And you know how to raise the money, and you feel really good about it. But this fear that, like, for example, the rights of female are going to take over everybody else or something you said before. I mean,
everybody else if they're not.
I've got no intention of that. I just want to be a human being who's creative and intelligent.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
But I think what David was saying about the oppressor not understanding the oppressed, I think the fear comes from, if I'm being identified as being part of the oppressor, what happens to the oppressors when oppression ends?
Maybe.
Generally, nasty things happen to oppressors when oppression ends.
5 minutes. Oh, what a joke. We've only got through one of your questions.
Slightly opposite from the same, what you were saying then. In the 70s, there was research that was in the Northeast where boys who had been educated at the high school level, and they discovered that as the girls did better, they left the poorer areas and made careers for themselves. The boys didn't. And their expectation when you interviewed them was the girls would come back. And then when the girls didn't come back from college, their lives tended to disintegrate. And it's that fear of, they knew what life was. Life was that you left school, you got married, you got a job in the factory or whatever. And when the girls started to move away, they weren't really sure what to do. And that's a little bit what you're saying, isn't it? All that was taken away. So they became quite vulnerable and fearful.
I suppose so, yeah.
And it wasn't meant to be girls or boys, it was just what happened to what was the normality.
Yeah.
And they waited because they thought it would go back to normal. The girls were
Yeah.
Did you finish that? Because I was going to say something different. It's interesting they worried about aggression. That's the thing. But that, I don't know. I think a lot of feminists aren't aggressive. So
They are, or they aren't.
I think that's a stereotype. You don't have to be an aggressive person to be in a demo or something.
Yeah, and
maybe you shout or be loud, but it's not the same as being aggressive.
Yeah.
It's a stereotype. But is that it though? Is that what you think it is? Or?
I think not, because when these guys were sharing this, they weren't sharing. This is what I think in my head. They were sort of coming to the realization, because you're not really asked, are you not a feminist? You know, you just these are generally, you know, equality loving, pro-woman sort of guys, but they didn't really ask themselves the question, why am I not a feminist? And it was just inquiring with the gut and finding, I've got this stereotype of fear that I've bought into, even though it's plain to me that that's absurd. So they knew that wasn't legitimate, but I mean, so often you find feelings in yourself that aren't legitimate. That's a lot of what life's about, isn't it? Working through that kind of stuff. So yeah. And I think part of what it means for feminism is that there needs to be grace and space for that kind of issue, because feminism has been something that's been quite segregated, generally speaking, from men from the start, really, hasn't it? And that culture of segregatedness in that struggle makes its mark, and allowing mixing to start happening involves a lot of grace for the fact that there is fear of the unknown, probably on both sides in certain respects. So yeah, I better quickly address the last two questions, because we must be down to 2 minutes now. But the other two questions were, in what ways might we see masculinity as oppressed? I won't put that out to you because I don't have too much time. I will give you my my three intuitions, or the things that seem to me relevant in working with other men in feminist activism. One is a sort of, I think consumer society is very emasculating and domesticating, and masculinity in consumer capitalism feels like a zoo animal kind of thing. It doesn't. This idea that you go to work to score points, and the more points you've got, the more stuff just is brought to you. You don't really live life directly. Does that make sense? You buy it in packets. You don't make your own things. You buy it in. You know, the slavery of the libido. I think male sexual energy has been very much co-opted to keep consumer capitalism going. This is how so much buying and selling happens, is by sort of exploiting masculine sexual desire. One of the criticisms of my book is that it doesn't really explore how that's oppressive to men. It sees that as men being a massive part of the problem, which is true. But the other side is also true, that masculine sexual energy is being used as a stuff, co-opted, and that's quite dehumanising, isn't it? That part of you is being enslaved to keep a system running. And the last is boredom of self and introspection. In a very consumer capitalism becomes very individualistic and self-gratifying. A man's first duty is to himself, says Rousseau. So I think for a man, for masculinity, or the idea of masculinity, whatever it may be, this becomes very boring, because there's no community to contribute to, or to be a part of, or a distinctive part of, or to serve, or to be great in, or what have you. I'll show you. Going out and killing a mammoth, yeah. I mean, I don't know how that sounds, but for a man receiving... we're sort of second-generation zoo animals, so we don't remember the wilds. We've only ever known meat brought in and thrown into the cage. So I think that probably the craze in growing your own vegetables is partly a desire for everybody to get reconnected to the processes that are part of living, rather than those processes happening in factories and you just winning them by the points you're scoring on your hamster wheel. I'll show you this, which I drew about 10 years ago at university. It's rather crude, it's not very clever. I'll show it to you because it has an immediate impact on men. Oh, wrong one, sorry. In my Genius one night, I drew that. And whenever men see it, they're like, yes, that's right. And one of them said, can I have that? I want to put it on a T-shirt. And he wears it on a T-shirt to church and gets in trouble every week. It's got the word whore on it. But I suppose what it seems to help to happen in people's minds is that masculinity and femininity are subject to this other thing, this order, this systemic situation, which neither want to play along with anymore, partly because it's miserable for yourself, but also because it's miserable for the other, and that matters to you as well. And the relationship between the two is what makes this so detestable. Whether it's correct or not, I'm not quite sure. You have to make your own minds up. But that kind of recasting the argument to see a systemic problem that isn't necessarily characterised by men, but is characterised by a system that exploits our worst.
You can see all of that. You can justify all of those through Scripture.
Would you like to do so?
Well, the obvious one, easiest one is whore, because women are continually characterised as prostitutes in Scripture, as a way of making their voice, of silencing them and so on. So any woman who's on the other side to a man in an argument or whatever is characterised as a whore, as a prostitute, so her voice doesn't matter.
Right, yes.
And women in terms of product, in terms of thinking about sort of the political teaching on marriage and divorce and relationships and so on, slave wives, etc. We always have more than one wife, but not more than one husband.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I would argue...
Unless you get perfect.
Yeah, maybe Solomon.
I would also argue the opposite, that you see the redemption of these things. So in the Bible, the prostitute is often the hero who fools everybody.
Yeah, I'm not saying I think that's a valid way to interpret Scripture.
Oh, right. But it could be misused that way.
I think it's been misused that way. And so part of this gender politics has been people justifying things from Scripture that are not actually really valid. So I mean, as you were saying about that sort of socialist second wave feminism, seeing religion has been used for certain values, and the radical one of religion being used to enforce patriarchy.
Yeah.
It's misusing Scripture for an agenda.
Yeah. Perhaps because of my youth, I'm quite disconnected from the time when there was a sort of a palpable connection. Obviously, that kind of thing was very much the rage in the 70s. I was born in 1981, and I suppose my experience, I know a lot of men who are feminists openly, and lots of Christians who are very direct in that way. And I don't really, I suppose feminism critique now seems to be so focused on the dehumanising processes of consumer capitalism. And I think everyone's forgotten that capitalism was sort of the Reformation's fault. The whole issue seems to have been dislodged entirely from the question of religion. And now you're getting to the point where The Guardian keeps on having religious writers and Christians writing in The Guardian, because The Guardian is starting to think, oh, these guys are actually wonderful guys. But then you look at the message board and you see no one else thinks that. But the question of religious oppression, for me, is one that I don't see very active anymore. But it can be, it's anecdotal, depends on what circles you're in. Right.
It's there, you know, the virgin. I can remember asking once whether the one's a virgin, where's the next generation?
Yeah.
It's setting, it's just there. It's not something that's spoken about. It's just there in the tradition.
Yeah.
And hopefully the younger ones are going to see that isn't there.
Yeah. I guess I'm optimistic. There seems to be a time of real growing consciousness anyway. I will just quickly run through the last thing, which is what kind of masculinity helps men rise to to the feminist struggle. In a way, it's a problematic question. Underlying this whole discussion is a problematic question of what we think about masculinity and femininity, and whether they're completely constructed or whether there is sort of a God-given spirit that is different, or what have you. But we don't have time to do that. We'll talk amongst ourselves afterwards, I suppose. The three themes that, in my experience, seem to awaken and activate men to consciousness, to involvement, to contending in this way, is one, men I know have a desire to contend for the other. It's part of what makes them feel alive. It's part of what makes them feel close to God, I think. So, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That model of loving the other in a servant-hearted, other-centered way is very activating of a sort of a kind of masculinity, a sort of the kind that I expect that the feminist movement would have to be gracious with and look at as a curious, wonderful, strange, dorky characteristic that men, whether they do it right or not, the best in them wants to contend for the other. By the way, when I'm quoting Bible passages here, I'm not saying they're the property of masculinity and not femininity. I'm just saying these are things that evoke the best in masculinity as I see it. The other is critical consciousness of the structure of life, the order of life, and the rebelliousness that comes with it. So Romans 2:12 verse 3, what's something like, what does that say? Do not conform any longer to the do not conform any longer to the principles of this world, or this order, as we might translate it, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So this call to non-conformity, which I think in the past has been misunderstood of, don't conform to the world, just look forward to dying. That's not what the word means. Cosmos means order or system, and it can mean world, but don't conform any longer to the pattern of this order. That's delightful to my masculinity, because there's something rebellious about it, about wanting to understand the way the world works and subvert it. I think part of what's scary about feminism for men is, oh no, I'm keeping the old order or something as a man. You might not be. You just think that because you're a man. But that call to critical consciousness, to questioning, to subverting the way the world is. And lastly, is a desire to act upon the world, which I think is a thing that you see God calling human beings to do in the sort of the Genesis story. They're called to to cultivate, to garden, to name things, to multiply, subdue creation, that kind of thing. We need to distinguish that from dominating or conquering creation. But acting upon the world and changing it in some way. We're in a situation where so many men just feel it doesn't enter men's minds a lot of the time these days to think, how do I speak into the world something that lasts and changes it for good? They don't think that they have that calling, or certainly not that power. So I think those three are sort of biblical mandates that help activate men towards contending for what's going on in the feminist movement.
Why is that? Is that connecting with what you were saying earlier about sort of feeling that you're competing to sort of get stuff? Is that what we're talking about? Why do men feel like that?
Why do they feel disempowered to change the world in any way?
Yeah.
I think it's because of
why men specifically, because women can feel like that too. What does that do?
Well, I think women can feel all these things. This question is interesting with regard to masculinity, because with regard to feminism, because feminism in particular is in danger of the danger is that men will feel pigeonholed in the role of keepers of the old world and not changers of the world. They were stuck in the old. Yes, right. Yeah, they felt excluded from the purpose of changing the world. Yeah. I'm sort of casting these three things not because they're exclusive to men, but because I think they're keys to inviting graciously a gang of bumbling male fools into, to begin to learn to take part. So that's the thing on those. We better stop, haven't we? Yes. Yeah, Jesus is okay with idiot men sort of doing the best they can and not getting it all the time. So
That doesn't seem like a theme.
It does. Okay, thank you very much.